Jnanatimirandasya Jnanam Javashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamahyam Dadati Svaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utaparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitamtam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakamitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchan Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing with reading of Bhagavad-gīta as it is from His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupāda. And last time we are continuing with the third chapter, which is entitled Karma Yoga. And it's about working with knowledge and detachment for the pleasure of the Lord, and this is better than false renunciation. So last time we finished the section how Krishna is telling Arjuna to set the proper example for other people by executing his duties, and also that these duties should be done in detachment. And particularly Krishna was speaking what is the consequence of not being Krishna conscious. Then for those people there is no hope of perfection. He spoke also that we cannot suppress our nature. We should act, if we are conditioned, we should act according to our nature and also engage this nature in the service. Then there is if we have some attachments or aversions, those can be regulated, but also we have to be careful not to be attached to this regulation, because there is also risk of fall down. And also regarding our nature or our duties, it's recommended to do one's own duty rather than, even imperfectly, rather than one's other's duty perfectly, because our duty is according to our nature, and according to purify our nature, it means we should do activities which are connected to this nature. We cannot do activities connected to others' nature, because then we are not purifying our nature. So like this. And today we will continue. Krishna or Arjuna will ask how to defeat, or how we can deal with lust, which is the enemy of the soul. So this will be today's topic. So we continue Shloka 336. Arjuna vacha atakena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha anichan api varshneya balad iva niyojitaha. Arjuna vacha, Arjuna said, Ata, then kena, by what, prayuktaha, impelled, ayam, one, papam, since charati, thus purushaha, amen, anichan, without desiring, api, although varshneya, or descendant of Vrishni, balad, by force, iva, as if, niyojitaha, engaged. Translation: Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Purport: a living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. So here Arjuna is asking the question because we may also have the same question. Sometimes we want to do something, but our nature or modes of nature are forcing us to do something completely different. So we can really be feeling like we are forced into something, even despite our desire or endeavor. Still, these modes are so strong that they can carry us in different directions. So this is basically Arjuna's questions, what we can do about it. So Lord Krishna will explain something more in the following shlokas, what is the situation or what is happening, and also how to deal with it. So 337. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Ihavaryan Vairanam. Shri Bhagavan Vacha, the personality of Godhead, said, Kamaha, lust, Eshaha, this, Krodhaha, wrath, Eshaha, this, Rajaguna, the mode of passion, Samudbhavaha, born of, Mahaashanaha, all the worrying, Mahapatma, greatly sinful, Vidhi, no, Enam, this, Iha, in the material world, Vairanam, greatest enemy. Translation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Purport, when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust, in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk is in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, the lust is unsatisfied. When lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is the lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. So here Krishna is answering Arjuna's question that the reason why we are forced into this is our contamination by lust, which is happening when we are in the material world. So our natural love for Krishna is in this way contaminated and is dragging us in different directions. And lust is particularly here the result of the mode of passion, and then it can transfer into wrath, which is the result of mode of ignorance. So Srila Prabhupada gives one hint here how to get out of it, because passion is still kind of active state. So he's saying we should be engaged in some prescribed method of living and acting, which will bring us up to the mode of goodness. So this is still some hope there in the mode of passion, because mode of passion is also described that we don't know what to do. We want to do something. We still have this, endeavor or willingness to do, but we are not sure about what's the proper, what's not proper. So in this state, it's still hope that if we get proper guidance how to act, then we can be elevated up to the mode of goodness. But when this guidance is not there, then passion will drag us down to the ignorance also and to the wrath. Also, this what is mentioned here, when lust is unsatisfied and turns into wrath, then into illusion. So we did this, we read this already in second chapter, is 262, 63, I think. How this progression is there when it starts with lust or some meditation on sense objects, then how this ends up in the fall down in the material world again. So we'll continue. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So here we see again the this contamination that we originally in the spiritual world, we have propensity to serve the Lord in a loving service. But by contamination of this lust or by misuse of our independence, which end up in the material world, then instead of satisfying the Lord, this propensity is turned to satisfy our own senses. So Krishna gave us even in this position because he's so merciful to us, so compassionate. So even in this situation in the material world, he has given us the chance how to get out of it. And when we fulfill or not fulfill, when we are frustrated by our desires or material desires, lustful activities, then usually it's the point when we are starting to inquire, okay, something is wrong with my life. So what is going on? And then is the time to approach the spiritual, I mean, scriptures or devotees or like that, so we can get some guidance. So this is usually where people are waking up when there are so much suffering. Mostly when the people are sinful because, pious. Because if they are sinful, it's more difficult to inquire about these things. They are just complaining. But for pious people, especially, this works. And they are approaching God, what is wrong. Okay, so continue. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, one should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janman Yasayaton Vayat Itaratascha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and vrat can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Rama, exhibited his vrat by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in Bhagavad-gītā, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his vrat upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and vrat, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. So, so this is the inquiry about the Supreme, because Supreme is origin of everything. So everything comes from the Lord, and also everything can be utilized in his service. We have this dualistic attitude in material world that something is good and something is wrong, but basically from Krishna's point of view, it's not like that. Even Krishna was stealing butter, and stealing we are considering like something bad, but Krishna did it for pleasure of others. He did it as a pastime. It's not something like he was envious of someone, or is not this bad intention behind that. Is the intention of making his devotees blissful, or letting them narrate his pastimes like this. So in this way, even lust can be spiritual, because lust is just contaminated love of God. We have this propensity of love, but because of this material contamination is not properly utilized. So basically this is a natural thing, but it just to have to be engaged in the service of the Lord and then purified. And also is mentioned here the wrath, even the anger can be utilized, like in the case of Hanuman or Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra. So we utilized anger very nicely. Sometimes also we have, you may have, just recently I was attending one class in Bangalore, and somebody was asking when we have children and they are not behaving properly, if we can use anger. So of course we can use it like this if those persons are our dependents. Usually this is the scenario. If we are authority to someone, then we can use anger, but if we are dealing also with devotees, we have to be very careful not to use it too much, or do it nicely with the loving attitude. But even there, we can somehow manifest that something is wrong with the behavior of this person. So in this way, we can utilize also these things. And Shloka 338. Dhumena vriyate vahnir yatha darsho malena cha yatolbena vrito garbhas tata tenedam avritam. Dhumena, by smoke, avriyate is covered. Vahnihi, fire, yatha, just as. Adarshaha, mirror, malena, by dust. Cha, also yatha, just as. Ulbena, by the womb. Avritaha is covered. Garbhaha, embryo. Tata, so. Tena, by that last. Idam, this. Avritam is covered. Translation: as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this last. Purport: there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but last under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb above the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position for the child in the womb. For the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. So here is Krishna describing the different levels of covering of one's consciousness. So it's compared to fire covered by smoke, which is basically situation for human beings. Then mirror covered by dust, which is more like for animals or birds. And then embryo covered by the womb, which is compared to the trees or plants of these living entities which are not moving, because embryo is also doesn't have so much opportunity to move in the womb. And most easy to awaken the consciousness is, of course, the human form of life, which is compared to a fire covered by the smoke, because if we properly manage the fire, it can grow bigger and bigger if we don't curb it completely. If we little fan it or help it a bit, it can be a blaze. So this is the position of human beings, that we have this great opportunity to, by cultivating the Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada is saying here, under able guidance, so we can awaken our consciousness, we can uncover it. So that's why we should be very much aware, if we are in the human form of life, to utilize it properly, because once the human being doesn't utilize it, then he will again return to the cycle and will go through this plant and tree life and animal life, and in this position it's very difficult to awaken, unless one is fortunate to meet Lord Chaitanya in some Kali Yuga again, that he was able to awake animals even, or trees, so like this. But this opportunity doesn't come in ordinary way, so it's very rare. So better to utilize this human life now, as we have human bodies, and don't risk this situation that we enter again the animal bodies or plant bodies and like this. Okay, 339. Avritam jnanam etena jnaninuntyavairena kamarupena kaunteya dushpurena nalena cha. Avritam covered jnanam, pure consciousness, etena, by this, jnaninaha, of the knower, nityavairena, by the eternal enemy, kamarupena, in the form of lust, kaunteya, o son of Kunti, dushpurena, never to be satisfied, analena, by the fire, cha also. Translation: thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness become covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Purport: it is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maitunya-āgara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this last is a symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. So this is quite important verse in a sense that we should know what we are dealing with. If we have these lusty propensities, we should be very careful that it's not like ordinary hunger. If we eat something, we are hungry, and we eat something, that hunger is satisfied. But it's not like with lust. If there is lust and we try to satisfy it even more, we can see it also if we eat some passionate food, which is too much spicy or too much sugar there or something. So we can see up to one point we satisfy the hunger, but because the food itself is in the mode of passion or even in the mode of ignorance, it pushes us to eat more. And if we eat more, satisfaction will not come. We overeat for sure, but satisfaction will not come from this point. So better also, this is the kind of hint that we should cook also sattvic food, because if we eat sattvic food, then this lust will not come. When we are satisfied, when the body is satisfied, hunger is satisfied, then after that, also mind is satisfied. Lust is not produced. But if we eat passionate food, then it never goes like away. So that's one of the manifestation how it works when we eat like this. Also sometimes because we have different needs, we should not replace, let's say, spiritual need with the material need. We may think we need something, but how to say? Let's say I have a spiritual need. For example, I have some sadhana, and let's say I'm reading every day from the books from Srila Prabhupada, then maybe I'm chanting or something. And if I don't finish these activities, my spiritual need is not fulfilled. So I should not do like, because of dissatisfaction, I tried some material enjoyment instead. It will not work. We cannot fulfill our our spiritual needs with material activities. So by eating something, I will not satisfy my chanting or my reading or my sadhana. So we should be also careful with this, how this works. Once we set up some sadhana, is kind of it is said that we can even manifest or create our own religion, some own sadhana, and if we don't follow, we will not be satisfied. It's worded like this. It's a principle. Once we set up some dharma, then we should follow it. If it is according to scripture, not according to scripture, the principle is still working. Just the mechanism of it. So, of course, better to follow some bona fide dharma than invent something. But this is the principle, that we cannot satisfy this dharma by any other means. We have to do this dharma which we are supposed to do, or whether it's invented or is given from the scriptures, still we have to follow. Otherwise there are consequences. There is no satisfaction, and like this. Okay, if there are any questions, comments. Otherwise, finish here with this verse. Mentioned. And of course, this is what is basically keeping us in the material world, which is always keeping us in this circle, this lust. If it is not satisfied by the spiritual practice, then we will go to material enjoyment, and it's difficult to get out of this cycle. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned is that the strongest thing in the material world is, of course, sex life, because it's the most or the strongest form of lust, how it is manifested. Basically, it's opposite to the love of from the spiritual world. So more love in the spiritual world. If we put it on the other side, the more lust it is also. So this should be purified, and then this strong love or strong lust can be transformed into strong love also. Okay, so we'll end here. Thank you. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad-gītā ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktivedanta ki jai.